Good morning. Welcome to Pulse America News. Tonight, diplomatic failure rocks U.S.-Iran relations as marathon talks in Pakistan collapse without agreement, leaving a fragile ceasefire hanging in the balance. After 21 grueling hours of negotiations in Islamabad, Vice President JD Vance and Iranian officials have failed to reach a deal. The talks collapsed over two critical sticking points. The U.S. demanded Iran permanently abandon nuclear weapons development and relinquish control of the Strait of Hormuz. Iran refused both demands, insisting on its right to uranium enrichment while maintaining leverage over this vital oil shipping route. VP Vance called this America's best and final offer, but Iranian negotiators returned to Tehran empty-handed. Pakistan, serving as mediator, vows to continue efforts despite the setback. Now, the question is, what are the immediate implications of this failure? The two-week ceasefire remains in place for now, but its future is uncertain. The U.S. has announced a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, escalating tensions significantly. Gas prices remain high at over $4 per gallon, and experts warn it could take months to normalize. President Trump faces a different military escalation and continued diplomacy, while Iran's regime shows no signs of backing down from its nuclear ambitions. This diplomatic deadlock leaves both nations at a dangerous crossroads. We'll continue monitoring this critical situation.
What was the sticking point over? You said it was over nuclear.
It was over nuclear, very similar. Yeah, very good. I guess you're listening. It's over the fact that they will never have a nuclear weapon. Iran, you marking it down? Iran will not have a nuclear weapon. And we agreed to a lot of things, but they didn't agree to that. And I think they will agree to it. I'm almost sure of it. In fact, I am sure of it. If they don't agree, there's no deal. There'll never be a deal. Iran will not have a nuclear weapon, and we're going to get the dust back. We'll get it back either. We'll get it back from them or we'll take it.
Stay tuned for further updates as this ceasefire drama develops. Breaking news right now. Just in. Vance reveals why talks with Iran didn't end with a deal. Possibly could they have chosen not to accept our terms? Let's talk about the Iran negotiations and maybe what went wrong in Islamabad. Joining us now, Vice President JD Vance. Mr. Vice President, thanks for the time. So exactly what happened and where do we go from here?
I wouldn't just say that things went wrong. I also think things went right. We made a lot of progress, but we also made very clear, and I think this is part of the progress we made, what the terms where the United States could make some accommodation, what terms we were flexible on, and what things we absolutely needed to see in order for the President of the United States to feel like he was getting a good deal. And so we laid those things out. We had some good conversations. I think it was the first time that you had ever seen the Iranian government, the U.S. government meet at such a high level, maybe in the history of the current leadership of Iran. So that's, I think, a positive. And again, we did make some progress in the negotiation. The big question from here on out is whether the Iranians will have enough flexibility, whether the Iranians will accept the critical things that we need to see in order for things to get done.
Well, what are the red lines like for Iran, and what didn't they accept? Why are we at the place we are at now?
So back out just a little bit, Brett. What the President of the United States has said is, number one, Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. So all of our red lines flow from that fundamental premise, because it is one thing for the Iranians to say that they themselves are never going to have a nuclear weapon. They are willing to say that, and that's good. But you have to, of course, verify these things. And there are two things in particular where the President of the United States really said we have no flexibility. We have to get to the outcome that the President said. On the first of those things, what some people call the dust, which is the enriched uranium that the Iranians currently possess, we have said that we want that to come out of their country, and we would like to take possession of it. Now, why does that matter? That doesn't matter, of course, because they have access to that material now. That material is actually buried underground by Operation Midnight Hammer. But if you think about this over the long haul, the president doesn't want to leave the next president or the president after that to be worrying about this program. And so we would like to get that material out of the country completely so that the United States has control of it. That's number one. And the second thing is that, again, to this point about verification, it's one thing for the Iranians to say that they're not going to have a nuclear weapon. It's another thing for us to put in place the mechanism to ensure that's not going to happen. Part of that is, of course, to ensure that they don't have the ability to enrich uranium, which is how they got so close to a nuclear weapon before. So those are really the two things where, frankly, the Iranians, I think, did make some progress. They moved in our direction, which is why I think we would say that we had some good signs, but they didn't move far enough. And so what we decided is, you know what, given that we don't think this current team and this current timeline is going to be able to make a deal, let them go back to Tehran. We're going to go back to Washington, and that's where we are today.
So is there a next step? Are there more talks coming? And do they happen in Pakistan? And are you leading them?
Well, it's an interesting question, Brett, and I think fundamentally it's a question that would be best put to the Iranians because the ball really is in their court. We've made clear where we're willing, again, to be accommodating, and we've made clear where we absolutely need to see the nuclear material come out of the country of Iran. Now, what's interesting, Brett, about this is that in the process of doing this negotiation, I do think that we acquired some knowledge about how the Iranians are negotiating. And this is ultimately why we left Pakistan, because what we figured out is that they were unable, I think the team that was there was unable to cut a deal. And they had to go back to Tehran, either from the supreme leader or somebody else, and actually get approval to the terms that we had set. So, again, whether we have further conversations, whether we ultimately get to a deal, I really think the ball is in the Iranian court because we put a lot on the table. We actually made very clear what our red lines were. We also made clear, Brett, that we actually would be very happy. The President of the United States has said he would be very happy if Iran was treated like a normal country, if it had a normal economy, if its people were able to prosper and thrive. But in order for Iran to be a normal country economically, it's going to have to be a normal country from the perspective of not pursuing a nuclear weapon, and it's going to have to be a normal country from not pursuing terrorism. And so there really is, I think, a grand deal to be had here, but it's up to the Iranians, I think, to take the next step.
I hear you talking about the enriched uranium, a nuclear weapon, and the inability for them have one in the long term. I don't hear you fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz toll-free. Is that one of the red lines?
Well, it's one of the things we talked about, Brett, is that we need to see the Straits of Hormuz fully open. And this is, frankly, one of the things where the Iranians tried to move the goalposts during the negotiation. We made very clear that that's unacceptable. We came to the negotiations saying the United States, what we've given here is a ceasefire. We've stopped bombing the country. What we expect the Iranians to give up is a full reopening of the Straits of Hormuz. We have seen, as the president has said, some significant uptick in traffic coming through the Straits of Hormuz. That's good for the global economy. It's good for the United States of America as well. But we haven't seen that full reopening. So our expectation is that the Iranians are going to continue to make progress to opening the Straits of Hormuz. And if they don't, it's going to fundamentally change the negotiation that we have with them.
You are not surprised. The Iranians often talk about negotiations in a different way. The Iranian foreign minister posted in intensive talks at highest level in 47 years. Iran negotiated with the U.S. Good faith in war. When inches away from Islamabad, we encountered maximalism, shifting goalposts, lessons learned. Goodwill begets goodwill, and enmity begets enmity. That does not sound like they're headed back to the table anytime soon. That does the ceasefire continue, and then the war starts again?
Well, first of all, Brett, I have to give a lot of credit to Field Marshal Munir and the Prime Minister of Pakistan, both who are incredible hosts and I think incredible statesmen and helping, mediate the conversation between us and the Iranians. Again, two countries that have not really had serious discussions in a very long time. But to your point about Foreign Minister Araghchi's statement, if you see what Foreign Minister Araghchi said, yes, there's a little bit of bluster. But if you read between the lines, he himself is saying that we were just inches away from an agreement. And I think that what that suggests is the Iranians, one, they're very interested in making a deal. Two, they did move pretty close to our position over the stage of the negotiations. But one thing I'll say, Brett, is Iranians are very different negotiators. At least those Iranians were very different negotiators than we are in the United States. What I did and what Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff did is that we made very clear, look, these are the things that we're willing to give, but these are the things that we must have. We must have the enriched material out of Iran. We must have their conclusive commitment to not develop a nuclear weapon. And I think that if the Iranians are willing to meet us there, then this can be a very, very good deal for both countries. If they're not willing to meet us there, that's up to them. That's their decision. And really, the ball is very much in their court. So you ask what happens next? I think the Iranians are going to determine what happens next as the President of the United States says, we have the cards. We have the military advantage. We now have additional economic pressure that we're applying on them through the blockade that we've imposed on their oil coming out of the Straits of Hormuz. So we have a lot of cards. We have the leverage, and we're going to see what the Iranians do with that.
That's how the blockade works. USS naval ships stop Iranian vessels going through the Strait of Hormuz.
Not just Iranian flagged vessels, Brett, but any vessel that we know is going to Iranian ports or has come from Iranian ports. You're probably going to see some vessels try to reflag themselves. But of course, we're going to know, because we have very good intelligence, which ships are going in and which ships are coming out that are connected to Iran. But Brett, here's the very interesting thing about all this is that the only thing the Iranians have been able to do, they haven't, of course, beaten us militarily. They've had their military been decimated. They haven't been able to prosecute the case when it comes to weapons of war. What they have done is engage in this act of economic terrorism against the entire world. They basically threatened any ship that's moving through the Straits of Hormuz. Well, as the President of the United States showed, two can play at that game. And if the Iranians are going to try to engage in economic terrorism, we're going to abide by a simple principle that no Iranian ships are getting out either. We know that's a big deal to them. We know that applies additional economic leverage. And again, Brett, the president wants the Iranian people to thrive and succeed. He has had his negotiation team put on the table a serious proposal. The ball is in Iran's court. Did we make progress? Yes. But we're going to find out from the Iranians whether we can make that ultimate bit of progress that gets us to a big deal.
The president has also said he wants this to end as soon as it can. It is being reported that you had real skepticism about this at the beginning and that you expressed that to the president. Is that true?
Well, Brett, you know, I give my advice to the President of the United States, and we all do, and I expect that when I give advice to the President of the United States, that it's going to be private, because the president should rely on his senior advisors without them then running to the media. What I will say, Brett, is that I 100% agree with the president on the fact that Iran can't have a nuclear weapon. I've seen that just in the negotiation that we've had over the last couple of days, that these are tough negotiators, but they're fundamentally the kinds of people where them having a nuclear weapon would impose terrible costs on the entire world. If they're willing to engage in economic terrorism on the entire world, what would it mean? What leverage would they have if they had a nuclear bomb in Tehran? That's not an outcome that is acceptable to us or really should be acceptable to anybody. So I 100% support the president's goals here to keep nuclear weapons, to keep the worst weapons of war out of the hands of the Iranians.
A few more things, Mr. Vice President. You say there is progress being made here, and the trip to Pakistan was not fruitless. However, I'm not hearing the next step. If the Iranians don't do the next step, you also campaigned for Viktor Orban in Hungary. He lost that race, defeated after 16 years in power. Your thoughts about whether it was worth it to go support Viktor Orban in that race, considering he lost significantly and he is one of the only European leaders who supports Vladimir Putin?
Well, first of all, Brett, I think that Viktor Orban's a great guy who's done a very good job. I think that his legacy in Hungary is transformational, 16 years fundamentally changing that country. But one of the reasons why we decided to do that, Brett, is not because, we can't read polls. We certainly knew there was a very good chance that Viktor would lose that election. We did it because he's one of the few European leaders we've seen who's been willing to stand up to the bureaucracy in Brussels that has been very, very bad for the United States. So, for example, when you see a European bureaucrat go after an American company, sometimes the only vote no, the only vote to protect that American interest has been Viktor Orban. We didn't go because we expected Viktor to cruise to an election victory. We went because it was the right thing to do, to stand behind a person who had stood by us for a very long time. So this wasn't about Russia, and fundamentally it wasn't about Europe. It was about the United States and the fact that he's been a good partner to both me and the president personally, but also to the United States. I'm sad that he lost. We'll work very well, I'm sure, with the next prime minister of Hungary. But it wasn't a bad trip at all, because it's worth standing by people, even if you don't win every race.
Mr. Vice President, stand by if you would.